Awesome. So it's about 7, so I figure we'll go ahead and get started. My name is actually Anthony Lewis. You guys can call me Tony since you all know me now. I've been coming to these meetings for, I don't know, a long time. I'm filling in for Damon tonight. Damon's out of town. I don't know if you were here a month or 2 ago. Damon kind of talked about putting a group together to help run these meetings and do those kinds of things. So I will be your MC for the evening. I'm also giving the first talk, so I'm sorry or you're welcome. We'll see how it goes. I'm supposed to talk about some housekeeping things. First of all, thank you, Capital Factory, for this space that we are hopefully going to outgrow soon. Look at this. There's a couple of chairs up here, guys, if you don't want to stand. There's a couple of chairs up here if you do want to stand. Either way. If you need the restrooms, you go out those doors, you take a right, and you'll see some big signs. Men's is one way and women's is the other way. Let's see. So here's how this is going to work. We're going to give a talk, take a little break. During the break, I'll say who's hiring, who's looking, that kind of thing. So if you're hiring or looking to hire people, you can come up here to the front and we'll take care of that. Then after the break, we'll have a more advanced talk. Really good talk by this guy. Is it not more advanced? You laughed. Okay, not more advanced talk. Another talk. And then after all that, we will go down to BD Rallies down on 6th, and you can have your beverage of choice. Be that what it may. So first off, does anybody have any announcements? Anything Ruby related? Nola is not here. If she were here, she would tell you that you should come to Austin RB, which is just for Ruby people, not Rails specific. I think they meet up here. I'm not sure when they meet anymore. Anybody go to that, Austin RB? Is it
first Monday at Beach Club?
First Monday?
And the other side.
And the other side. They're, okay, cool. There's usually a talk and then a code kata where you sort of pair with somebody. And I've been a couple times. It's a lot of fun, but I haven't been in a while. I should start going again. So there's that. Any other announcements? Anything Ruby related? You guys are not going to say anything about Ruby Weird.
We did that a couple of weeks ago.
Did that a couple of weeks ago. Okay, keep Ruby Weird. When tickets go on sale, buy them. Quickly, yes. Yeah, follow them on Twitter. When they say the tickets are going on sale, go buy some because they don't last long.
10 hours last week.
Yeah, 10 hours. Okay, so yeah, watch out for that thing. Okay, also, thank you to Rapid7, who sponsored our pizza. Hopefully you got a slice. If not, thank you, Rapid7, for the pizza that everyone else is eating. Do we have anyone from Rapid7 who would like to say a few words? Why don't you come up and say a few words? That would be fantastic. I would love to have you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Samuel Huckins. I'm manager of the Metasploit application team. We're hiring quite a few folks right now at Rapid7. On my team, we're looking for a senior software engineer focusing on all kinds of interesting Ruby and security related issues. We've also got a few positions open in some other teams. Brandon?
Yeah, I'm Brandon Turner. I'm a manager of our DevOps groups at Rapid7. I'm hiring another senior engineer doing similar stuff, working with Metasploit and some of our other projects, both Ruby, Rails, Java, Cloud, all that stuff, fun stuff. And then we have another guy that's not here that's also hiring in Austin, doing a lot of really interesting QE work, quality engineering. So come see us after. We'll come up here during the hiring break.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you've never played around with Metasploit, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, especially, if your friends don't update the software on their computers or if they run servers or things like that. It can be really fun. Don't get arrested. There you go. All right. What else am I forgetting? What am I forgetting? Great, you just did this.
I think that's all, man.
That's it?
Got
okay.
the bathrooms covered.
All right.
Who's sponsoring the drinks?
Who is sponsoring the drinks? Who is sponsoring the drinks? WP Engine, that's right. You guys will get to talk. You guys will get to talk after the break. How about that? I think that's the flow of things. Unless you want to come up and talk now, it's up to you. Or you can give my talk. I got some pretty good slides here.
Wait till afterwards.
Afterwards, fair enough. Does this thing work at all? It really sounds weird in my head.
It's working.
It's working? Okay, good. All right. I'll try not to spit on it too much. So yeah, who here went to RailsConf this year and got one of these purple shirts? A couple people, a few, not many people. I didn't see that many people there that I knew. Maybe I don't know that many people. I don't know. But yeah, so one of the things that was announced was that this Rails API thing was going to be included with Rails 5, which is really cool because I've done a lot of API work and I've built APIs. But not everybody knows about Rails API. Not everybody knows what it does and what it's capable of. So I thought I'll give a talk about that. So here it comes. So like I said, Rails API, that's my name. It was this guy. I am now, for I think 3 days now, engineering team lead at Sharethrough. We are hiring here in town, but you know, who isn't? I wrote this book called Rails Crash Course. I'm not sure why that picture is so small. And I'm on Twitter and I'm on GitHub, all those places that everybody else is. So after the talk, I'm going to give you a secret code that you can use to get 30% off my book. So think of that. Bless you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about why you might want to build an API. Then why the heck do I want to use Rails API? What matters there? We're going to talk about serialization because that's one of the big parts of what you do. Talk about JSON API, and then I'm going to show you some tools that I use when I'm working on APIs. But first, thing I hate, mirroring. Not a fan. Much better. Much better. Okay, so I already talked about this, RailsConf 2015. Who was there? If you didn't go, go out to like Confreaks or YouTube or someplace and search for some of these talks. There were some great talks there. As a matter of fact, the gentleman sitting right here, he's going to give his talk that he gave at RailsConf, correct?
Yes.
So there you go. Just like being there, only you didn't have to fly to Atlanta. I went, I had a good time, ate some good fried chicken and collard greens, because that's what you do. If you only watch one talk, watch Sandy Metz's talk. Oh my God. You know what? Just watch all of her talks. But this one specifically, if you want to level up as a Ruby developer, read her book and then watch her talks and then read her book again. It's good. The talk this year was amazing, I thought. Worth the price of admission. So DHH spoke, obviously, gave the keynote, and he talked about what's coming up in Rails 5, which was kind of interesting. Some people were happy, some people were not happy, but well, that's what you get. So quick show of hands, who's on Rails 4, like the latest version, the app that you work on every day, you're Rails 4, you're there, okay? That's not quite half the people, that's maybe a third. So Rails 3? Oh, there's some hands. Yeah, about as many. Anybody less than 3? Yeah, there you go. That's the one. That's what I'm looking for. So maybe you don't care what's coming in Rails 5, because maybe you're so far behind you're never going to get there. You know, maybe you just won't make it. Because I'll tell you, I have been involved with moving an app from Rails 2 to Rails 3, and it was painful. It was bad. It was real bad. 3 to 4 was not as bad as 2 to 3. So you guys that are on 3, you can hit 4 pretty soon. Yeah, 2 to 3, man, start over. So Rails 5, here's what you're gonna get. You've got to be running Ruby 2.2.1 or later. you know, keep current. TurboLinks 3. No one cheered. I don't think many people cheered at RailsConf either. But, you know, if you watch DHH's keynote, he actually shows some of the TurboLinks 3 stuff, and it doesn't look too terrible. That's my opinion. This new thing called Action Cable that nobody had heard of before RailsConf, which is kind of like WebSockets on Rails or Ruby WebSockets, which could be really cool. We'll see how it turns out. Rake is now inside Rails, so forget Rake DB migrate. Now you're going to do Rails DB migrate. So that's sort of a confusing thing for new people. Is sometimes I type Rake, sometimes I type Rails. When do I type each one? Forget it. Just type Rails all the time. So that's not a huge feature, but for people who are new to Rails, maybe it's a good thing. I use aliases for all that stuff anyway, so I'll have to change my aliases. But that's another talk. And finally, they're going to merge the Rails API gem into Rails itself. That's why we're here. So, why do you want to build an API? Well, everybody wants an API because we're all building single-page applications now. We're all doing Angular or React or whatever. We're building JavaScript applications and we have Rails on the back end. Or maybe you want to build a mobile client. Maybe you want third-party people to be able to access your data somehow. That's what it's all about. Specifically, we're going to build a RESTful API that's going to spit out JSON and accept JSON. Anything else, I don't want to hear about it. Bad words like soap, things like that. So why would you want to use Rails API? Why can't I just use plain old vanilla Rails? You can, you certainly can. Done that in the past, works great, but there are some benefits to Rails API. First of all, it's Rails. It's a Rails application. Everything you know and love Rails is there. But there's fewer gems. There's fewer controller modules. There's fewer rack middlewares. So what does that mean? It means it's going to take up a little less RAM, maybe run a little faster, and maybe leave out a bunch of stuff you don't care about. So let's take a look at that. So straight up Rails, right out of the box, Rails 4.2, just Rails new app, bundle, 54 gems. Same thing with Rails API, they get 36 gems. Okay, that's not huge, but it's a difference. Here's what your gem file looks like with Rails API. This is it, other than the comments at the bottom. And honestly, when you generate a new app, you don't even have this. Basically, it's like, okay, you got Rails API, Spring, and you've got a database, and that's it. Notice what's not there. There's no CoffeeScript, there's no Sass, there's no sprockets, there's no asset pipeline, there's no, TurboLinks, all those things that people bitch about all the time, complain about all the time, they're not there. So that's pretty cool. So if you want to build a lightweight application, this might be a good start for you. A lot of people say, hey, I'll just use Sinatra. And that's fine. I've gone down that path too, and then I think, man, I need to access a database, so I know how ActiveRecord works. I'll just include ActiveRecord. And then I think, oh, there's all this stuff in Active Support that I use all the time. I'll pull that in too. And like for me personally, I have this Sinatra app with most of Rails included in it by the time I'm done. And I'm thinking, why didn't I just go Rails to begin with? So controller modules. We can look here, Rails 66 modules in application controller. Oh my God. Rails API 42, still big number, but not as bad. Your rack middleware, same thing. Went from 25 to 19. So that's all good. So what else? What else is different about Rails API? What's the benefit of this thing? You'll notice application controller now inherits from action controller API instead of action controller base. That's how we're leaving out a bunch of modules. There's no CSRF protection because presumably with an API, you're passing in some sort of token every time already, so you don't need a CSRF token too. That's more of a problem when you're running an app with sessions, which for your API you're not going to be doing. There's no views at all. Like everything to do with views is gone in Rails API because you're not going to be showing HTML. You're going to be returning JSON. And since there's no views, there's no new or edit routes or actions in your controller at all. Because new and edit just show a form. This is an API. We're not showing forms. So that's gone. So let's look at application controller. This is your Rails app. You got protect from forgery and all this stuff. Rails API, it's nothing. It's just empty. You can add what you need in there. The directory structure, similar. I should have made that a little smaller, then you guys would have not even known it was there. But the views directory's gone, the helpers directory's gone. It's just a lot more lightweight. And you can see the same thing by looking at the routes. There's no new and there's no edit. So didn't want you guys to think I was just making this up for the most part. So how do we use this Rails API thing? Well, here's what I did, because I'm still using Rails 4. I install the Rails API gem, and I say Rails API new app, whatever you want to call it. You can do that today. With Rails 5, you'll do Rails new app -- API, and that'll do basically the same thing, because it's going to be included in Rails. So if this is just too much typing for you, wait till sometime this fall, end of the year, and you can do it this way. So what I did, because I love you guys so much, I went ahead and made 2 applications. One that's just straight Rails and one that's Rails API. I created some scaffolds, kind of like this, for posts and comments. So if you want to play along, you can do this. I even added some seed data. So I created a couple of posts, a couple of comments, stuff those in the database. And then I put all that stuff up on GitHub. So if you want, the first one, API test Rails, it's a straight up Rails app. API test Rails API, it's using Rails API. So you can go up on GitHub and check those out if you want to, just to sort of see the differences and compare, if you like. So the whole point for me of the API is serialization, which is we've got these models, we want to convert them to JSON and return them to someone, or we want to take in some JSON and create a model. I mean, that's the basics. We're basically doing CRUD here. So there's a couple of ways to do this. When I was just starting out, a long time ago, the way you did this was you implemented this as JSON method. So if you say render JSON and some object, it's going to call to_JSON on it, which somewhere down in the bowels of Rails called as JSON. And you would do something like this. You would say, okay, as JSON, I only want ID, title, author, and body. And internally, this gets converted basically into a hash with those keys, which then gets converted into JSON, and it goes back to whoever requested it. Later, as most people did, I discovered this thing called JBuilder. Hey, this is a lot different. So this is basically, if you haven't seen JBuilder before, this is DHH's, I think he wrote this thing. Basically, it's a DSL for JSON views, basically. So this says, okay, I want a JSON array of all these posts. So I'm going to loop over these, and I'm going to extract from each post the ID, the title, the author, and the body. And while we're at it, let's give it a URL, and I'm going to call this view helper post URL. So each one of these will include those attributes and a URL for each post. The nice thing about this is, in your controller, you don't have to say render JSON posts or anything like that. That's just a regular view. Rails knows how that works. So all you have to do is look up the posts, and then it's going to say, hey, I need an index view for JSON. It's going to find it automatically. It's going to generate that. And you're going to get something that looks like this. Again, so small. ID, title, author, body. There's the URL. We're good. It works. So I've done a lot of that, a ton of that. JBuilder, man. You can still do that. It's fine. If I were building an API today inside an existing Rails application, I might even do that. It's pretty easy to understand. Once you wrap your head around the DSL and how it works, it's not bad. But sort of the new thing that's going to be coming with Rails API is this thing called ActiveModel Serializer. So instead of some crazy DSL, this is actually a class that you create. And believe it or not, when I used a scaffold generator inside my Rails API app, it creates this for you, which is pretty sweet. I always thought scaffold was worthless. Not in this case, it actually does something good. So it creates a post serializer. Same attributes, and I included has many comments just so you can see how it works. It does what you expect it to do. It's going to include the comments. And then when I created my comment scaffold, same thing happened. It put the attributes in and belongs to post, so you can get back to the post from a comment. In this case, you do have to render the JSON. So you say, all right, get all the posts, then render JSON posts. Rails is smart enough to go out and look and say, oh, you've got this post serializer, I'll use that. When it sees that you've said it has many comments, it says, oh, I guess I need that comment serializer too. Well, I'm at it, it uses that. So you get something like this. Similar to what we saw before, it's got the ID, title, author, body, but then it includes the comments, and it's put each comment basically in line there inside that post, which is pretty nice. The problem that we tend to have when building an API is people say, hey, how do I know what format to put these things in? You know, where am I going to find all the different parts? You know, do I have to know that there's this thing called comments, that comments are related to posts? You know, what if I include another field, or what if I want to do something different? What if I want to put in the number of comments, or, you know, this is a bike shedding moment. This is when, you know, you have a meeting, you come up with a format. Obviously, you're not doing posts and comments. You're doing something much more complicated, usually. And you go to a whiteboard and you spend an hour and you argue over, you know, what fields need to be there, what fields don't need to be there, you know, where they should be. You know, maybe I want, like the last one had URLs. Do I want to call it URL? Do I want to call it link? Do I want to, you know, how do I want this thing to work? So luckily, some really smart people came up with this specification for JSON APIs. And being programmers who aren't very creative at naming things, they called it JSON API. So it's a specification for building APIs in JSON. It's at jasonapi.org. You can go check it out. It's pretty deep. It covers every use case I've ever encountered and then a whole bunch more. So it tells you exactly how to format your JSON so that anybody using your API doesn't really have to know that much about how the data's laid out. They just know where to look and they find what they're looking for. So at my last gig, this is something that we sort of did. We took this JSON API specification, made a few modifications to it, nothing major, and that's what we used for all of our new APIs going forward, so that our front-end guys didn't have to think real hard and try to figure out and how to make this work. They didn't have to spend a lot of time, you know, figuring out how to parse what's coming out of the API. If you're still using JBuilder, this is a pain. That's what we were doing there, and it was a pain. I had to go through all of my JBuilder files and wrap things in different arrays and add keys and do all kinds of nasty, horrible things to get it to work. If you're using ActiveModel Serializer, it's real easy. You do this. In one of your config files, you just say ActiveModel Serializer, config adapter, JSON API, and you're off to the races. ActiveModel Serializer knows the specification. It knows what attributes you care about. It knows, you know, about relationships and things like that. Puts everything in the right place for you automatically. So that's really awesome, in my opinion. Okay. So I blew through that pretty quick. You guys feel good about that? You're all going to go home after this. You're going to go to media rallies. Then you're going to go home and build an API. That's what I like to hear. That's the plan. We're all going to build an API tonight. So, when you get started on your API, you're going to have to use some tools to help you out, make your life better. So I'm going to talk about 2 tools that I use briefly. And maybe I'm different. I like command line tools. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm kind of old school. So one of the things I use is this thing called curl. Everybody use curl daily? Yeah, curl. Right on. There's my command line, guys. I use them. I'm gonna code like a man. So, and I also use this JSON View Chrome extension. You know, you guys with your IDEs and your graphical tools, yeah, y'all can have all that. Won't be long to be taking my job. I don't know where this is going. So, curl, how does that work? Well, it works like this. I want to get the post with ID number 2, so I say curl and localhost, because I'm developing, post2.json. Curl goes out, talks to that host, gets the JSON. Works great. That's an individual post. I could have actually, originally I was getting post.json, which got the index view, and it was too big for the slide, and I was like, this looks like crap, so I just got an individual post, so it fits on the slide. Still looks like crap, but it's all there. So that's good, but I could have done that in my web browser. I've showed you that already. Well, curl also lets you do things like post. So I'm going to create a post. And here I'm saying, oh, okay, curl, here's some data that I want you to send. And this is basically your params. So I say post title third. And include this header. Tell Rails, hey, this is going to be some JSON, content type application JSON. When you do that, Rails says, oh, yeah, I'm down with JSON. I know how that works. So I'm going to look at this data and parse the JSON. If you don't include that, things go south rather quickly, because Rails sees this first string and it says, oh, you've got a param called post title third with a value of nil, and that does not do what you want. So if you go home later, remember this. If you don't include the content type header, it will not work. I promise you. I've been there and banged my head on the desk for half an hour until I remembered that. And then finally, there's the URL. Notice I didn't specify like a post request anywhere. Curl is smart enough to say, hey, you've got some data included. I'm just going to assume this is a post. I could have done that. There's a flag that lets you specify post or get. I forget what it is because I never use it. But basically, if it sees -d, it says, oh, this should be a post request. So, and as you can see, my API consumed this data and it created a new post, gave it ID 3, title third, and set the author and the body to null. Because I didn't include those, and thankfully I don't have any validation, so that's nice. The other tool I use is JSON View, which is a Chrome extension. I'm sure there's something for Firefox that does this, and Safari or whatever, IE, I don't know. But usually when you go and you hit your JSON API, you're going to get back something like that, which is not fun to read. Go with JSON View, it looks like this. And this is actually after I went in and set it to use JSON API. So you can see in JSON API, everything is wrapped inside this data container. Inside data, there's always going to be a type. In this case, we know this is your posts. There's going to be attributes for the post, and there's always going to be relationships. So the only relationship we have here is comments. But, you know, so conceivably you could write an application that just knew how to parse this JSON API stuff, and it could tell. It could say, okay, here's the type of data I've got, here are its attributes, here are its related objects, and not have to know that much specifically about your API. So, a couple of things. I can actually live code some of this stuff and we can check it out. Or you guys can ask me any questions you might have, because I know you have burning questions. What's your burning question, sir?
outside of JSON API, are there other adapters for formatting, like for JSON JSON schema and other stuff?
That is a great question. I know it comes with 2 adapters. One called Flatten that just takes your model and just flattens all the attributes together. And there's one that's just called JSON. Not even sure what it does, to be honest. But you can certainly write your own adapters. You can also write your own serializers. So it's pretty flexible. ActiveModel Serializer, right now, I don't know if you guys noticed or not, but it's like a 0.10 release candidate that's out. So that version is not fully baked yet. There was a version 8, which everybody loved, and then version 9, which sort of diverged and went down a weird path. And now this version 10 that's about to come out is based on version 8. So you have to sort of be careful if you're looking online and reading documentation. Some of the stuff might be telling you things that don't work. But if you look at, I went straight to GitHub and looked there, and it tells you how to write your own adapter, your own serializers, anything like that you need. So I'm sure it's possible, but I have not done it.
Do you know if the adapter is, can you change it at runtime when you render the JSON, based on the content type header?
I believe you can, yes. I think you can actually, I know that you can pass a different serializer when you render. You can say render this, comma, serializers that. I'm sure you could probably set the adapter there too. Haven't tried it, but perhaps. But that would be really cool. I should have dug into that more, definitely.
So does that mean ActiveModel Serializer has won the war against like Ravel and Grape and JBuilder and all those others would probably go away?
No. I would say definitely not. It's going to be included with Rails, Rails 5, because it's going to be a dependency for Rails API, so it will be there by default. But there's a lot of things that come with Rails by default that have not won the war. Like test unit or mini test. It's there by default, but most folks use RSpec. CoffeeScript's there by default, but it's real easy to comment that out. It's just one of those things where it's there, but there's nobody's twisting your arm making you use it. So I would think all the alternatives will probably stick around for a good long while.
Do you have a preference?
Do I have a preference? Like I said, I've written a whole lot of JBuilder. If I were starting fresh today, I would probably dig into ActiveModel Serializer more, just because I like the idea of building an API that doesn't have all that other stuff in there, because JBuilder is still a view. If you're building an application where you want a single application that can render HTML or JSON, then I'd probably go JBuilder. But these days, stuff that I've been working on, I'll say this: at my current day job, I'm spitting out HTML all day. We don't even have an API. But if I were building an API, I would probably not be generating any HTML server side. I would be doing, personally, I'd probably be doing Backbone because that's what I know the best. So I'd have some static HTML pages out there that was a single page Backbone app that was just pulling down data. But that's, like I said, that's just what I know. So yeah, that'd be my preference. Anybody else?
So are there things like other concerns like paging, or if you had like a lot of records, is that handled by?
That is a very good question. What you would do in that case, it's something I didn't show. When you actually render the JSON, you can include a meta block, and that's what JSON API uses. There's a meta block that tells you like a count of records that's returning to you, and it will have like paging and things like that. As far as I know, it's not built in. I mean, it's something you can do yourself pretty easily, just with a limit and an offset. That's how I've done it in the past. And inside that meta block, you say, okay, here's the first 10, or here's the first 20, or whatever. And then if you want the next 20, you're going to hit this URL. That's one thing I didn't do in this. I don't include any URLs in here. And JSON API does support that. They have a links section that you can add, just like the relationships or the attributes section. And that links section usually has like a link to self, which is like basically the URL that you hit. And then it has a link to next and previous and things like that. So certainly JSON API supports it. It doesn't happen automatically out of the box with ActiveModel Serializer. But that's how I would do it anyway, just with limit and offset params that you can pass. Anybody else? All right.
What about concern about documentation? API?
What's that?
Documentation.
Oh, documentation? Yeah, that's...
On these cases, like, they don't have any asset defined or something like that, and you can kind of, you can use it with, for example, Swagger, but you don't have anything.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's nothing here that I'm doing. Yeah, there's tons of third-party stuff out there that I would use for documenting, but certainly it's not anything built in that's going to handle that. So yeah, I would be pointing people to JSON API, and hopefully I would write some of my own documentation.
There is a useful tool. You can export your schema with ActiveModel Serializer, so that kind of gets you part of the way there.
Okay, that's cool. You know what it's called?
I mean, it's built in. So I don't
Oh, really? Okay. All right. I didn't get that far, apparently. Okay. All right. Are we done? Are we done? All right. Thank you, guys. If you want my book, which covers Rails 4, you can go to No Starch Press, right there, Rails Crash Course. Put in ATX Rails, you get 30% off. That's cheaper than Amazon. And they include the ebook in Kindle format, EPUB, PDF, whatever you like. And the ebook is free if you order it from No Starch. All right. That's all I got, folks. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you very much. And, you know, now I still don't get to sit down, which is the best part of being the speaker. So we're going to take a little break, but don't take a break yet. Our next talk is going to be Cultivating a Code Review Culture by Mr. Derek Pryor, which is a fantastic talk. I can't wait to hear it. But before we get there, make sure I got to check my agenda. I don't do this often enough. All right, so first off, who is looking for work as a Rails developer? Let's raise our hands. Looking for work. Who is desperately looking for work? 2, 3. Come on, guy. You told me earlier. There's 4. 4? Anybody else? 4 looking for work. Okay. All right. You guys remember who you are. Who is looking to hire? Who is hiring? Who has a company that is hiring? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that 6? I saw another hand about halfway up there. All right. So more than 4. We'll say 6. I'm hiring 2. Okay. So what we'll do now is we'll all take a little break. You guys who are hiring can congregate over in this area. You guys who are looking, you come up here too, and we'll all talk. And who knows, you might leave this place with a job. Wouldn't that be awesome? All right, the rest of you, feel free to have, it looks like we've got a little bit of Coke and maybe some Dr. Pepper left, and some greasy cardboard boxes. If you'd like to chew on one of those, feel free. And we will meet back here in, say, 15 minutes. All right? So before we hear our next talk, we've got one more group of people that are going to come up here that are sponsoring the bar tab tonight. And it is WP Engine. You guys did this guy do by himself? That's so cold. Yeah, come on. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. All right, so thank you, WP Engine. And
got it. So we're from WP Engine. We do WordPress hosting, so y'all are thinking that's PHP, so why the hell are we up here? So we do a lot more than PHP. We have the entire portal of the WP Engine runs on Rails, and we have an R&D team of about 60 people that runs PHP, Python, Ruby, straight Ruby, and we're hiring like mad. So if you're interested in some of that, please come look us up on our career page. Anything else? I'm Rod, by the way.
very nice, very nice. A nice group of people. I interviewed there once. They were pretty cool. Didn't laugh at me. That's nice. All right. And with that, we have Mr. Derek Pryor. He's going to tell us about cultivating a code review culture, which I want to hear.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, sir.
Cool. So my name's Derek Pryor. I'm a developer at ThoughtBot in the Boston office. This is my first time in Austin, so thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk today about code reviews and how we can get better at doing them and what it means when you're on a team that does them really well. Let's start with a show of hands. So how many of you today are already doing code reviews as kind of an ordinary, everyday part of your workflow? Awesome, fantastic. How many of you really feel like you get a lot out of doing those code reviews? That's most of you that raised your hands originally, so that's pretty good. And the reason why I asked that is when I first started doing code reviews, it was like 10 or 11, 12 years ago, and it came down as like an edict from management on high that we were going to do these code reviews to satisfy some regulatory requirement. So as you can imagine, none of the developers really looked at them favorably. It was the worst part of our job, and we all basically loathed it. It was something we put off until the very end, right before we were about to release some software. But, so why am I up here talking to you about how great code reviews are? Over time, my views changed on that to the point where now, today, I would tell you that doing code reviews is probably the chief way that I get better at doing my job every day. And in my experience working with several different companies as a consultant at ThoughtBot, I see a lot of different practices that work and some that don't. So that's what this talk is about. So first, why is it that we do code reviews in the first place? Well, what we tell ourselves is that we do it to catch bugs. This is what we tell management, and this is what we tell ourselves, and anybody that will listen. Like, code reviews is a great way to catch bugs. What we're going to do is look at every line, and we're going to tell whether or not, like, are you calling a method on something that could be nil here, or whatever the bug may be that you're going to try to catch. Unfortunately, that's not really what we're doing. Yes, there's some amount of that. Code that has been peer-reviewed is going to have fewer defects than code that is not. But the problem is, as I said before, we tell everybody to listen that code review is great at catching bugs. So we set this really high bar for the level of quality assurance that we're going to get out of code review. And unfortunately, what we actually get, the studies that people do on code review, what the level of QA we get doesn't meet those expectations. There's a couple of really interesting reasons. The chief one is that when you're looking at a diff, you can only see what's changed. But the really nasty stuff that happens when what you changed interacts with the rest of the system. So unless you have a lot of context in your head about how that whole system works, you're going to miss things, which is fine because there are a lot more interesting things that we can be getting out of code review. So what are those? In 2013, Microsoft Research and a couple people from the University of Lugano in Switzerland did this study here. And the way they ran the study is the first thing they did is they asked a whole bunch of developers across Microsoft and managers across Microsoft, a bunch of different teams. As you can imagine, they had a lot of like senior developers, junior developers, architects, dev leads, managers, etc. And they said, why do your teams do code review? What do you get out of them? And just like we talked about, they all said, we find defects. That's what we do. So after they did that survey, they went around and they selected a representative sample of people across the company. And they watched them actually do code reviews. And they interviewed them, asked them about what they were commenting on, why they were commenting on it, etc. And then after all those reviews were done, they went back through the system that they were logging all these comments in and manually classified all the comments to say, like, this is something that, you know, this caught a defect, or this suggested an alternate solution, you know, something like that. So, like I said, what they found was that it was a lot less about what they were getting out of it was a lot more than just finding bugs. Instead, what they were getting was knowledge transfer, increased team awareness, so everybody's more familiar with the different parts of the code base that they might not get to work in every day, and finding alternative solutions to problems. So one person involved in the study had this quote, which I really liked, was, "Code review is the discipline of explaining your code to your peers that drives a higher standard of coding. I think the process is even more important than the result." So that process being more important than the result part isn't on the slide, but it's something that kind of the whole talk here revolves around. We're going to revisit this. This is all about having good habits, and being in the process of doing code, being in the habit of doing code reviews is going to drive continual improvement. I also really do like the definition that is on the slide. So it's a discipline of explaining your code to your peers. I think there's one small problem with it, and we can tweak one word and really get at what we're after with code reviews. So we can say code review is the discipline of discussing your code with your peers. So explaining versus discussing. What we're trying to do is open things up to a discussion. What it comes down to here, a lot of our job is actually a communication issue, right? We write code a lot, but what we're really trying to do is communicate with each other about the code, or communicate what the code does, that type of thing. So doing good code reviews is a communication issue. Code review is one of the few places where we actually get to discuss a change and how it impacts the systems we work on in black and white, right? When we go to conferences and we come to talks like this, we talk about things at an abstract level and we think like, oh, that sounds really great. But code review is where we actually get to see how those things implemented in your system look. So it's a really good benefit. So that study I cited earlier found that you needed to have a strong code review culture really in order to see these benefits that I talked about. So what does that mean, to have a strong code review culture, and how do you get one? Well, like I said, I've been doing code reviews for the last 10 plus years or so, and it really wasn't until the last few that I really started to feel like I was getting a lot out of them. And so I started to ask myself, like, what is it that drove this change that I've seen, right? And I would say what it is that everybody on the teams that I'm involved in embraces the fact that we're going to be doing code reviews, and we're all on the same page about what it is we're going to get out of them, and we all kind of play by the same rules in code review. As I mentioned at ThoughtBot, we do a lot of consulting with companies of various sizes, and nobody ever brings us in to say, like, we're really bad at doing code reviews, come help us. But what we invariably find is that in places that are struggling with poor code quality, or maybe even like bad interpersonal problems that are a result of like tensions over how things were implemented, things like that, those places do not have a strong code review culture. And in my experience with those places, when we're trying to get them to have one of these strong code review cultures, it really boils down to like 2 key rules of engagement that you can do to get better at code reviews every day. So the first of them is something you can do as the author of a change, right? You're going to set people up to successfully review your code. And the second rule of an engagement is what you're going to do when you're reviewing a change. So let's start with that first one. As an author, what are we going to do? So this quote here is from Gary Vaynerchuk, who's into like social media marketing, but I think it's also appropriate to code review. So in our code review, your content is the code. It's the diff, right? But the context is why that diff exists. Your code doesn't exist for its own benefit. It exists to solve a problem. And the studies on code review show that insufficient context around a change, right, not having that why, is the chief impediment to a quality code review. So what we really need to do is provide excellent context. We need to tell people why we're making a change. So let's take a look at an example of what I mean by excellent context. Or first, we'll start with one that's basically no context. So this is an example of like a technical explanation you may see come across in a code review. You might get just this subject line that says use type column first in multi-column indexes. Maybe you know what that means, maybe you don't, right? It has something to do with the order of columns in an index, okay? There's no why here, like why are we making this change? What impact do we expect to have? Why was it the best change? It's not really interesting to me as a reviewer, right? If I don't know what this means, I can't really help you review it. I can look at it and maybe you changed the order of some columns in an array, and I can be like, yeah, sure, I guess you did that. And if I do know what this means, like you haven't told me why this was the right solution, right? And it's not interesting for anybody reviewing it. So what I would do in a situation like this often is I would follow up and then say like, oh, this looks okay, but why are we making this change? And oftentimes what that gets responded with is like fixes and a link to an issue, right? Or that would be like a GitHub issue, which actually wouldn't be too bad, but oftentimes it's like a link to Jira or something like that. And the problem, you all laughed, which is good, because the problem with that is that when you click that link to go through the next issue, you're not going to find like a nice, concise explanation, right? You're not going to find the context. What you're going to find is the report of a problem. So maybe now you connect like what the problem is, but you still don't know why this is the solution to it, right? And maybe that's buried in there, but it's buried in there in like a chain of comments and all sorts of other stuff. So what would I like to see instead? Well, something like this, right? And you don't have to read this really. What's important to see is that like right off the bat, we're identifying the problem that exists currently with the order of the index, right? And then we're going to back it up with documentation. So it tells you how multi-column indexes work in Postgres with a link to more documentation if you're interested. This particular pull request was actually on Rails, so there's also links to MySQL documentation. And that will tell you how it works on MySQL. It's similar there. And then finally, why is changing the index or in the order of the columns in the index important? Like, what is the benefit we're going to get out of this? So as you can see, like compared to the original where we just had that subject line, if you don't know what the ordering of columns in an index means, or what the impact of changing them is, you can basically just read this description all the way through and have a really good idea. If you need more information, there's links for you, right? So now you can read this and learn something. Or if you already knew what the order of columns in an index meant, you can read this last paragraph and see why it's important that we're making this change. So that's what we're going to do as an author, right? We're going to bring everybody up to speed. When you've been working on a change, maybe you've been working on it for 4 hours or maybe 2 days or a week, right? What's really important is that you're going to boil down what you've learned in that period that you've been working on the change, and you're going to bring us all up to speed. I would say that like 2 paragraphs is a good thing to aim for with every change, and sometimes that's like ridiculously hard, but try anyway. Things that you think are self-explanatory, 2 weeks later, you're going to be like, what? Why did I do that again? So just try and cram it all in there. And the beauty of it is when you're done with all that, you're going to boil this down, you're going to squash all your work down as one commit or whatever, and you're going to merge that into master, and you're going to keep this excellent explanation you wrote. And it's going to live on, and you're going to thank yourself 2 weeks from now when you're wondering why you did something, or 6 months from now, whatever it is. And yes, this is going to take us more time, right? But how much more time? I don't know, like 5 or 10 minutes, and you're going to feel really good about it at the end. You're like, oh, okay, I summed up what I did. Maybe you'll even find some holes in your thinking. Like you're forcing yourself to look at this from a higher level and be like, oh, I didn't consider this, or that type of thing. So that's what we're going to do as an author. So as a reviewer, now I've got a review. What do I do, right? How do I properly review something? So at Thoughtbot, we call this ask, don't tell in our guides. And to see why this is important, we kind of have to take a step back and look at negativity bias in written communication. So there are studies around written communication that show that, like, if I were to give Caleb some feedback face-to-face, and where he can hear the inflection of my voice, not even maybe even over the phone, not even face-to-face, right? He's going to perceive that one way. If I give him the same exact feedback, word for word, written in a pull request, he's going to perceive that more negatively, right? And if he's in a bad mood at the time, even more negatively. He's always in a bad mood. So when we're doing code reviews, ask, don't tell is an excellent way to deal with this, right? Another great way to deal with it is compliments. So like if you are reading through a pull request and you learn something, absolutely let them know that like, oh, you taught me this. Or if you think something's a particularly interesting solution, comment on that as well. But at some point you are going to have feedback. And that's why it's important to remember that what we want to do is ask questions rather than making demands. When I remember to do this, like a lot of times on projects, I'll be reviewing a lot of pull requests, like first thing in the morning. There'll be 10 or so pull requests that come in from people who've been working overnight in some other place or something like that. And it's hard to remember to do this sometimes, but when I find that like, if I've forgotten in one pull request and I've gotten very command driven in my feedback, and then in the next pull request, I like, oh, I should remember, I can ask questions. When I do that in the next one, I can guarantee that next one's gonna have a more rewarding discussion for everybody involved. So again, let's take a look at an example. So extract a service to reduce some of this duplication is a command that I may have written in a pull request, right? The problem here is that, like I said, it's a command. I haven't opened things up for a discussion. If I'm the author and I get this feedback, my options seem to be, well, I can do it if I agree, or maybe even if I don't agree. I can enter into what seems like an argument, which may be why I just do it. Or I can ignore it, right? Which is probably the worst of all the outcomes, I think, because it sets up a really bad practice. And furthermore, like this command here gives the author like no credit for having thought of maybe extracting this, right? Maybe I already thought about this and ruled it out for some particular reason. So you can make a very small change to this that makes this a little more palatable. You can say, what do you think about extracting a service to reduce some of this duplication, right? And it's such a small and simple change, but now we've kind of dealt with that negativity bias by trying to open up a conversation. There's all sorts of different ways that this can go now. So if you disagree, that's fine, because I'm just asking you what your opinion is, right? What do you think about doing this? So now you can tell me you disagree, or maybe you did think about extracting a service and you realized and you decided you didn't have enough information yet, so you're going to tell me about that. And if you do agree that, oh wow, I could extract a service here, right? You're going to get that feedback loop where you're going to say like, oh, that's a really great idea, I did that, done in this commit, right? Or whatever it is you're going to follow up with. So we're fostering great discussion here, and that's what we're after. That's where we're going to see all these other benefits that I talked about. So when you're in pull requests and you want to soften your feedback to avoid this negativity bias, what do you think about is an excellent way, right? Just keep saying, what do you think about doing this? Or maybe say, did you consider if you want to propose an alternative? Or if you get lost in the code, something like, can you clarify is a lot better than what the hell's going on here, or something like that. Like I said, what we're after is softening our suggestions. We're trying to avoid negativity. Negativity is not going to lead to good discussions. So trying to avoid that is going to lead to bad discussions. And it works really well. Like if you are a junior developer and you are asked to review code for somebody more senior, I feel like it's kind of natural for you to be timid about providing feedback, right? That person has way more experience than you. They've been at the company longer, whatever the case may be. But if you're just asking questions, now you just look inquisitive, right? But you're also steering the conversation in the direction you want it to go. And conversely, it works the other way, right? As somebody who's more senior, when you're mentoring somebody, or if there's a junior developer on your team, if you issue one of those commands, what are they going to do? They're going to do it. But they haven't really learned much. They haven't gotten as much from that experience as they could if you asked them the question and kind of had a discussion about it, and then maybe they did it, or maybe they didn't. So this is really simple. What we're going to do now is just question everything. Like we're just going to tack question marks onto everything. So one caveat I would say is that it's really simple for questions to be kind of judgmental as well. So be careful of your tone with questions as well. So an example of this is, why didn't you just? And this is one of my personal pet peeves, and it's that word just, right? Words like it, like just, simply, easily. If you eliminate those from your technical conversations, or really any conversation where you're trying to describe something to somebody, you're going to be much better, much better received. It will be received better. The problem with those words is they, like, when I see a word like just, right, it makes me feel like I wasted your time. Like, why didn't you just do this thing that's way easier and you should have known about? That's how I read it. It's a good example of the negativity bias, right? Because if you just said that to me face to face, I might not even think about that at all. But reading it written has that effect. So you can take that word just out, like why didn't you? So is this better? I mean, it's a little better, but it's still negative, right? It puts the person receiving this feedback on the defensive. And it's, again, another example of the negativity bias. So instead what we're going to try to do is be positive. We're going to try to say, like, did you consider this? That kind of thing. And what we're really talking about by getting at these like positively formulated questions is the Socratic method, which is based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to illuminate ideas. So that's what we're really after. That's where we're going to get these benefits from code review, right? Through asking really great questions, we're going to arrive at a better solution, and everybody's going to get something out of the discussion. So that's it. Those are our 2 rules of engagement, right? As an author, we're going to provide context, and as a reviewer, we're going to ask all sorts of great questions to steer the conversation in the direction we want to go. There are a couple issues that we commonly see pop up in practice when you start doing this on your team. First is, how are we going to handle our disagreements, right? People are afraid that if they're not giving commands, that they're not seeming authoritative, that there's going to be disagreements and nobody's ever going to make a decision and move on. And the second is, what is it I should be reviewing anyway? Like, what is high value for me to look at? So let's start with conflict. So I would say, not just I would say, but research would say that having conflict on your team is actually good. It's conflict that drives a higher standard across your team. If you have no conflict on your team, if you all agree on everything all the time, then you need to hire some different people. Because you don't have a very, you have a monoculture really, and that can be dangerous. So you want to have some disagreement on your team, and you want to have the right kind of disagreement. So you want to have debate, you want to have a good healthy discussion, and that's what's really going to lead to higher quality and more learning. So there are two types of conflict that we typically see in code reviews. One of them would be that we don't agree on the issue, right? This is like I discussed earlier, like we just kind of are talking circles around each other. Nobody's really budging on what they think is the right way to go. So in these situations, what I advise is like everybody kind of take a step back and ask yourself like, why am I having such a hard time accepting the way this is, right? And personally, what I have in mind is like a minimum bar that I'm willing to accept for a solution, right? Do I think that am I not accepting this solution because I think it's dangerous and I think it's bad code? Or is it just not the way I would have done it? And quite often when we're having these discussions circling around each other, it's just not the way I would have done it. That's fine. Sometimes you just have to agree to disagree, right? So ask yourself, is this just not the way I would have done it? If the answer to that is, yeah, it's not the way I would have done it, and you've already had a discussion around and around about it, maybe just be like, okay, we're going to do it your way, and if this comes up again, then we'll revisit it. Maybe we'll never have to this discussion again because this code will never get touched again, right? You can stop a lot of wasting time there. So you just have to realize that reasonable people are going to disagree all the time, and just kind of live with the fact that not everybody's going to be on board with every single change, just as long as we're all comfortable with the quality of the change overall. So the second type of conflict is much more of a problem. And that's that you don't agree on the process. You might have somebody committing code directly to master, or as I've seen on a recent project that I was on, they would open a pull request because they knew they had to, and then they would immediately merge it in, because they did open the pull request, right? So what are you going to do to avoid these types of problems? The first, I alluded to earlier, at Thoughtbot we have code review guides that we all kind of like try to live by. And I think that's a really good idea for everybody to have. Like write down what you expect people, how you expect people to behave in code reviews, right? We expect that code's going to be reviewed. We expect that if somebody has questions, those questions are responded to, or if they have suggestions, you respond to those suggestions. You don't just ignore them, that kind of thing. If you're doing this already, if everybody's already on the same page and we still have people committing directly to master or not listening to feedback, that type of thing, then what I would say is that you have to go in to find those changes and comment on them right in the commit history, right? Make sure you're all still providing valuable feedback, and then follow up with the person, hopefully face to face, and say like, hey, I noticed this got merged, I had some comments on it. In the future, if you could just let that hang out in a PR for a little bit so I can get some feedback on it, that'd be great, that type of thing. And if you keep having these problems, then it's time to like start being a little more heavy-handed, and maybe you revert that change and open the pull request for them, right? And start having a discussion there. And what's really important is that it's not always you. It can't always be one person on the team that is the code review police, because if that's the case, then you're the only person that's bought it, right? So you're going to need to make changes to get everybody else on board. So that's how we're going to handle conflict. So what about what I should be reviewing? A lot of people, when I talk to them about code review, say like, this sounds like it's going to take a lot of time, right? I already told you it's going to take 5 to 10 minutes to write your description when you submit your pull request. Now I'm going to have to review, or maybe even several people on the team are going to review all of these changes. It's going to take more time. What I'm really after here is I don't want to spend more than 5 minutes to review your change. More than 10 minutes is a long time for me to review your change. So what I'm hoping for are really small pull requests, which also work well in being able to provide context, sufficient context on those changes. So when you're writing changes, make sure you're making them as small as you possibly can to ease the review and make sure you get a good quality review. When you get like a big giant diff, what often happens is like you get some comments at the top, people get bored, and they scroll to the bottom, and you get some comments at the bottom. And you want to avoid that. As to what it is you should actually be looking at when you are doing the review, it's all up to you, and that's really where we're all going to get the benefits from code review. You decide what's important to you to review, and you provide feedback about that. So like for me, I can tell you what it is I look at, and actually this list has changed since I wrote this talk, because it's always changing. Like I'm always more interested in different parts of the code. So one thing I often look at is the single responsibility principle, which if you're not familiar with that, that basically says that every object in your system should have just one responsibility, just one job. So I'm looking to see if we can extract some classes out to make things a little more single responsibility principle-y, right? And this is the S from solid design principles, if any of you are familiar with that. And the reason why I like the S so much is because if you squint, the O, the L, the I, and the D can kind of all be thought to follow from just making sure your objects have just one responsibility. I'll talk about naming a lot in pull request reviews. Like I'll look at class names in particular, association names in Rails code, method names. I'm really looking for great names. And the reason why is because it helps us have great discussions about them. It makes working with the code more natural, things like that. So I'll harp on names quite a bit in discussion to the point where sometimes people will be like, but what about the code? Yeah, I'll change the name. But the names are really important. So complexity, I'll often scan a code, I'll often scan a diff to see like the shape of it, to see is there a big clump here where the lines get really long? Like there's probably some complexity here, what's going on? Or overall, is the change just doing too much? Is it complex? Are we guessing at future feature work here? Which is something we probably shouldn't do. And then finally, test coverage, right? So I'm not making a list of the exact tests I expect to see everywhere, but what I'm doing is looking through and saying like, oh, they're adding a feature, so there's probably gonna be a feature spec, and oh, look, they covered this exception here, so there's probably gonna be some sort of controller test to cover this, or, you know, I'm just kind of characterizing the types of tests I expect to see, and then I'm making sure I see those in the diff as well. And like I said before, we're not specifically looking for bugs because they're tough to find. Like I'm not gonna just gloss over one if I see it, but the tests are really important because code review isn't a great exercise in finding bugs. So, and then finally, like everybody has what they're interested in, right? So like maybe you are really great at giving security feedback or whatever. And you're gonna look and see like, oh, you're doing a really interesting thing with params here. Are you sure that's safe? Or maybe you're really interested in performance and you can say like, oh, it looks like, you know, you could write, you're missing an index here, that type of thing. Like you're the type of person who looks for that type of stuff. What's important here is that we're all going to take the best from all of our teammates, right? If I'm commenting on the database level stuff and somebody else is really interested in security and they're commenting on security, like we're going to have a really good, well-rounded solution all the way through. So I didn't mention style here. That study I cited earlier from Microsoft found that people who got a lot of style comments on their pull request, or on their change request, whatever they called it at Microsoft, it happened to be, they happened to like view the person leaving that feedback kind of negatively, right? Because they thought that they were focusing on the wrong thing. Brit's nodding.
Man, I hate style.
So I do think it's important though. I do think the impression of having like a clean and consistent code base kind of has, it's like one of those broken window theories, right? So like if the code base is clean, you want to leave it clean. If it's messy, you're going to kind of tend to not really care about leaving a bigger mess, right? So how do I like balance these two, this dichotomy here, right? So I said that code review feedback is perceived negatively, but I think it's important. Or code review feedback about style in particular, sorry. So again, one of the things I recommend here is writing things down, adopting a style guide, whatever it is you want. Like go out and find one in the community or find one that matches the code that you're already writing today and just be like, this is how we expect to do it, right? Because we don't want to go back and change all of our code again. And you're going to have your style arguments there. You're not going to argue in a pull request about whether or not you should use double quotes or single quotes or whatever the case may be. And then after you've done that, after you've written it down, we're going to use our tools like RuboCop. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it'll basically look through your Ruby code base for style violations. You can configure it to do all sorts of things. Similarly, there's JS Hint for JavaScript. There's SassLint if you're writing Sass, all sorts of stuff like that. Thoughtbot actually has a service called Hound CI, which I'm not here to sell you, but I also think is a really good service that will run these as part of the pull request, and it will leave those comments, right? So you don't have to. The bot's going to leave the comment because arguing with the bot is not going to do anybody any good. So Caleb argues with the bot anyway. I do occasionally write back at the Hound bot too, but yeah. So that's it. Those are our tools for excellent technical communication, right? We're gonna do great communication in our pull request by, providing great context and remembering to ask questions. We're gonna know when to agree to disagree, that type of thing. And if we start doing this, then we're well on our way to having a strong code review culture. And what this means is the quality impact this has on your team goes beyond just one change, right? It goes beyond like, oh, that change went out, it was really good, it had great reviews. And it gets to like the type of team you have. So what do I mean by that? If you're doing great code reviews all the time, you're gonna have better code. I already said like, yeah, we're not doing line by line defect tracking here. But what we were gonna get instead is kind of great feedback from everybody on the overall approach you're taking. Right? There's several times where I've submitted a change and been like, that was solid work. That's gonna go right through, and then I get feedback from 2 or 3 different people that say like, make these changes. And you look at them and you're like, wow, this makes it even better. That type of thing. We're gonna have better developers, right? We're gonna be reading and writing about code every day. We're already writing code every day, but now we're gonna be engaging in discussions about it. And like I said before, we're gonna have concrete examples in our code base about things we've been reading, approaches we've been reading about or whatever. And we're gonna take the best from each other, like I alluded to just a minute ago. We're gonna have team ownership of code, right? So there's no more your code, my code, their code. We all kind of took a look at it when it went in, and we agreed that like this is a reasonable solution, right? And this leads to versatility, right? This is the knowledge transfer or team ownership of code kind of thing. And what that means is like, how many of you have a code base right now where like there's somebody responsible for that one area of the app, and when they go on vacation, it's like, oh, I hope there's no bugs in that area, right? So by doing code review, you kind of try to spread out the knowledge, right? You're lowering your bus number if you're familiar with that term. And then finally, we're going to have a healthy debate on our team. Like I've been involved with several teams that have kind of the silent seething type, who's mad about the way something was implemented or the way something was architected, or the so-and-so snuck in this change. Like we're trying to have discussions about these things in the right way to avoid that type of thing. And these are our tools for having great technical discussions. So looking at this list, right, if you have a strong code review culture, you have better code, better developers, team ownership of code, and you're having great, healthy debates that are leading to everybody learning more, right? This just describes like the kind of place I want to work from a technical perspective, right? It's the kind of place where I'm going to be getting better at my job every day. So that's, I think, why it is that you should be doing code reviews. It's not about finding defects, it's about getting better and having an enjoyable experience at work, right? We're all taking something from each other. So that's it. Questions? Yeah.
Do you guys do any pair programming, and how does that, what kind of impact does that have on code reviews?
Yeah, so we do pair programming. I would say that if there's only like 2 developers on your team and you're pairing, right, then that's the best you can do. If there are more than 2 developers on your team, I still like to get a code review. And the reason for that is when you're doing pair programming, you still have an amount of groupthink that happens, right? And you're all building up this context together. You 2 working there are building up this context together. And the code review kind of says, like, does this change stand on its own for somebody who wasn't involved with it for the last 6 hours, or whatever the case may be? So still try to do those code reviews if you can.
Derek and I used to pair together a lot on things, and we got our best code reviews when we fucked up the most working together.
This is true. Caleb and I pair programmed on something that was the worst change that either of us has ever written in our career.
And the third guy just looked at us like, no.
Other than like this talk, which was great by the way, how do you encourage your team or the people you work with to follow some of these guidelines? Or how do you encourage them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult oftentimes, especially as a consultant. Like on the last project I was involved in, I came on as like the sole developer in an office that had 5 other developers, and another office working with another office that had like 10 other developers, right? So I'm one person. How am I going to get all of these people to follow this process? And it kind of just started by me following the process, right? Like me trying to be like, I'm going to ask great questions, I'm going to do this. And also like there's a certain amount of like, when I review code for somebody who's used to this process, maybe I'm doing a little more. There's a little bit of training wheels involved, right? Like accepting some things that you might not want to accept to kind of bring people along and get them involved in the process. And that particular company had like a thing that where it was kind of viewed that like code review was a thing senior developers do, which I think is a really dangerous precedent to set. So I try very much to have like junior developers do code reviews like with me. Like we'd be doing pair programming that day. I'd be like, oh, first I have to do these 3 code reviews. Why don't we do those together rather than being like, I have to do these 3 code reviews first. Come see me in 20 minutes, right? Trying to get other people involved in doing the code reviews with you. Trying to pitch the benefits of them. Like this isn't about just finding bugs. Like that was so much of my hesitancy in doing them in the first place was like, oh, this is somebody else is going to judge my code, right? I'm not really comfortable with this. But when you get past that and realize that like we're all going to judge each other's code a little bit, and we're all going to just what we're all after really doing is improving the code and learning from each other. That really helps.
Yeah, so you said this is really good for small pull requests, and you recommend small pull requests.
Yep.
But in my company, it's like, okay, you get something from products, and then you branch, and then you start working on, okay, what's the database going to look like? And then you start working on some Rails code, and then some Angular code. Oh, it's still not working. And then you're working on, you just like do, and then maybe like 7 days later, it's working, it's ready, and then you go ahead and do the pull requests. So it's quite a bit of code. You know, it's like 50, 100 files.
Yeah.
So I mean, what at that point is what do you recommend?
Those are tough. What I would see is in situations like we work in those situations too, where you have like this giant feature that you just got to deliver all at once, right? And what I would say is like see first if there's like if you can introduce these models, right, without impacting anything, then introduce those models and like merge those in and make changes to them when you need to. If you can't do that, right, you can do a pull request to another branch other than master, right? So you can start with small pull requests about, like if you're starting from your data model, fine, then like start with your data model, do a pull request into your feature branch, have somebody take a look at it, be like, yeah, okay. And the reason why that helps is because, like I said, the change is smaller, and it also lets the people doing the review come along with you to kind of like build the context up on this feature over time, rather than just being like, boom, here's 100 files. How do you like that, right? Like, I don't know. So yeah, I would say like trying as much as you can to break that up. There's times when you really can't, like a refactor, right? You're doing this giant refactor and you can't merge any part of it without breaking something, right? In those cases, I would say take it commit by commit and try and have great atomic commits or great small chunk commits that have good, each one of them has a good message, and then say to somebody like, here's a pull request. It's going to work a lot better if you actually step through commit by commit, and you can kind of see the way I thought about the way I thought through this problem and the way things changed.
I'll just say for those huge features like that, consider a gem like rollout, where you can feature flag things so that you could put parts of a feature in, you know, where people can't see it. That's something that we do if we have a huge feature. We can commit it, you know, a piece at a time, get it in, but we're using rollout so no one can see it unless they have that feature flag turned on. Something we do.
Yeah.
Where do you put that? So you talked about providing context. I'm guessing that, or I assume that you meant putting that in the PR. But then once that gets merged, that's pretty much lost to the ages. Like I've never been able to find a PR.
Yeah. So what I would say is like, if I'm making a small enough change, that change is actually just one commit, hopefully, and that context is in that commit. So that when I open a pull request on GitHub, if there's only one commit, your PR description is the commit description, right? If you made several commits, then what I would say is like write that great pull request description, and at least where we work, we typically squash down to however many commits is appropriate, but make sure that each one of those kind of provides the context that you want. So oftentimes it is one commit, but it's not always one commit. So like things come up in discussion that would change your description of the change, right? So make sure you're kind of revisiting that, and then when you finally do that squash, edit that message to make sure that you've captured everything that was talked about in the discussion, and to make sure you're leaving, like when you run git log, you should have a really great like history of the commands that were issued to your repo and why, right? So the one line is the command, and the body of that is the why that command was issued. Yeah.
So how do you recommend the pull request get merged in? So it's like you put that pull request, you like wait a couple days, like as soon as somebody like +1s it, like okay, then they can push it, or
yeah, it depends team to team. Typically, what we'll do, we have small teams. We have like 2 or 3 developers, something like that. You're looking for like one person to give a thumbs up. If you have to wait a day, that's kind of a long time for us. Like we're trying to get to things like I mentioned, I alluded to, like I'll do some in the morning to make sure that we're done hanging out that didn't get finished up yesterday. I'll do some maybe right around the lunch break, like before and after lunch. And then I'll do some at the end of the day, like to kind of be like, oh, I only have an hour. I'm not going to pick this up. I'm going to go see what the code reviews are. If something's important, people will ping us in Slack or whatever chat system we're using on this client to say like, PR, can you take a look at this? And if nobody's taken a look at it again in a couple hours, they'll ping again, right? Because what's important to note is if you have a pull request, that's basically ready to go. That work is done. Work that's basically done is more important than whatever it is that's going to take you the rest of the 3 days, right? Because you're trying to get these changes out to users to impact their use of your system. Cool.
Have you found any ways to kind of break up or combine pull reviews into single activities, like particular meetings where you say, like, we're going to do a series of reviews versus having it be up to the people's schedule, not whatever.
I have never seen that work particularly well. Like having a meeting for code review, that's kind of how I used to do a lot of code reviews. Is like we'd all get in a room and we'd go through something. If you're doing small enough changes, it tends not to be too necessary. Times where I've seen it be interesting is when you're using it as like an instructive experience, like, oh, let's do like, not like a regular, like, oh, we're doing our Wednesday afternoon code review, but like, oh, there was a really interesting change that was made last week where somebody used some really cool patterns that maybe we haven't used in our code base. It'd be cool if we got the entire team together and just kind of step through it, right? And doing a code review like that of a change that maybe is already reviewed. But I haven't had great experience with having a dedicated meeting to do code reviews, or even like, I've had clients try to say like schedule code review time, which tends not to work particularly well in my experience. Is that it? Cool. I host this podcast with my friend Sean Griffin, so typically more technical than this, which is more of a soft kind of talk. But if you're interested in Rails development or JavaScript development, or we have an episode coming up on Rust, just various technical things, you can check it out at bikeshed.fm.
Thank you, sir. All right. So let's see. Need to thank everybody. Thanks Capital Factory for hosting us. Thanks Rapid7 for the pizza. Thanks WP Engine in advance for the bar tab. Thank all you guys for coming out. This was what I think a very large crowd. So now we're going to adjourn to BD Rallies, which is just down on 6th. Go down to 6th Street, take a left. We'll be on your left, and then we're gonna have a great night. So see you guys there.
Let's drink some beer.